Turret systems activated.
So, we've got a bit of an odd one today, as I'm willing to bet extremely few people remember this ancient DOS game, Backlash. The whole premise of this game was to take the concept of a World War II ball turret gunner and put it into a futuristic setting with spaceships. Now, instead of playing the pilot, who controls the ship and determines where to fly, you play the gunner, tasked with taking out anything which tries to shoot you down. The concept is unique for sure. I mean, even if you include modern titles, the number of games which allow the player to play this particular role are very few and far between. But the game itself is also very lacking, specifically since it was put into a futuristic setting. There's many things about this game which just don't feel right given the context mix it was going for, and we'll touch on those as we talk about the gameplay. That said, there's a lot of content, at least in terms of missions, with 45 missions in total in the registered version, and 15 in the original shareware release. Plus, a surprising amount of effort went to the graphics, most of which are done as pre-rendered 3D visuals, which they managed to fit into an impressively small amount of disk space. Backlash was created and released by a company known as Sanctuary Software Studio back around the end of 1994. Though since the original 94 release is virtually impossible to find anywhere, most online sources state that the game was released in 95. Now, as far as I can tell, this was the only game Sanctuary Software ever released, as the company quickly shifted from game development for consumers to specialized software and multimedia development for businesses. And amazingly, the company's still around to this day and has a massive portfolio of projects they've been involved with. But back to Backlash, it's a one-player action/simulation game with support for VGA 320x200 256 color graphics, and supports the AdLib for music and the PC speaker and Sound Blaster cards for sound effects. As for its current release date, the game was made freeware a while back, and thus the registered version is free to obtain. As for where to get it though, I'm going to recommend the old standby, which I can't believe I haven't had a chance to mention for a while now. The RGB Classic Games website at www.classicdosgames.com. As for physical copies, they're pretty rare, but due to low demand, they're also very cheap. It never got a boxed release, only a jewel case, with the only copy I ran across being sold for $10. So I imagine that's probably the price point you can be expecting for a physical copy, at least in terms of the commercially published version. For a copy which came direct from Sanctuary Software, who knows? Also, one other thing to point out is that there's another older game by the name of Backlash, but it's kind of obvious that that one isn't this one. Once again, gonna skip on the story because there's very little backstory to what's going on in the game, even though there's actually plenty of story context, but it's given to the player as they go along, as opposed to leading them off with something. The basic gist of it, though, is that with your increase in rank to Turret Gunner First Class, you've been assigned to a system defense craft patrolling a particular and important part of the galaxy known as Sector M, where a hostile race known as the Durians have been attempting to expand into while feigning attempts at peace. And your ship is assigned to a variety of missions throughout the sector based on where you end up after each, which is kind of clever actually. Having it so that where you start each new mission from is the same place you ended the previous mission kind of gives the impression of a continual and exhausting war effort. But before each mission, you're able to purchase missiles and equipment for your ship with credits that you've earned from prior missions. The upgrades available are actually somewhat limited, but essential all the same, as you can have up to 4 different kinds of missile launchers, each with up to 8 missiles loaded at a time. And you can upgrade your guns to do more damage, your energy systems to store more energy or recharge energy faster, and stronger armor so you can take more hits unshielded before being destroyed. You'll also use this screen to reload missiles, which, given how expensive they are, you probably want to avoid using in the early parts of the game so you can get your other systems upgraded as soon as possible. You're also allowed to adjust the difficulty level at any time. There's 4 difficulty selections: Rookie, Rebel, Rogue, and Rampage, in order of easiest to hardest. Although from what I can tell, the only difference the difficulty level seems to make is how much damage you take when you get hit. I actually set it to the easiest setting for reasons we'll get into shortly. Prior to each mission, you also get a briefing, and you can see your objectives, as well as if your turret ball is going to be front-mounted or rear-mounted. This just generally doesn't make a huge difference, but it can certainly affect things given that your ship is almost always moving. Once the mission begins, you're situated into your own special cockpit in the ball turret, and have a variety of controls and displays at your disposal. Most notably, despite being the gunner, not the pilot, you have control over energy allocation, which I guess kind of makes sense. You actually just have one energy level for both guns and shields, but altering the energy set point alters how much is reserved for shields and how much is reserved for guns. If either side of the energy reserve is full, but not the other side gets double the recharge rate. And if the shields go down, you take armor damage instead, and if the armor is reduced to nothing, your ship is destroyed. You also have a radar to show you nearby targets, and a secondary screen which can flip between target scans, flight path details, and state of the mission objectives. You can also read all messages from the pilot, the ship's computer, or messages over communication channels at the top of the screen, though it's very easy to miss these messages, so you need to keep watch for them. Actually, let's quickly discuss the controls because they're kind of weird. Firstly, you use the mouse to aim, shoot, and target, and 95% of what you're doing will be this. Well, much to my surprise, this is one of the few DOS games out there which supports a middle mouse button, which you use to target whatever's near the reticle. Now the other 5% of what you do is work with your ship's systems, and this is done using the function keys. F2 and F3 affect energy allocation, F4 cycles your missile selections, F5 through F7 changes what's shown on the lower right display. There are alpha keys for this functions, but they're scattered all over the keyboard, so it's just easier to use the function keys as opposed to having to hunt down the right letters to push. And since you don't need to use spacebar or the arrow keys or anything, you can keep your hand near the function keys without worry, which is weird, but you do get used to it. In terms of the actual gameplay, all you do is wait for the mission to progress to some degree so that the enemies warp in or you end up in a situation requiring your skills, and then it's time to start shooting. Since you're unable to control where the ship moves, there's an extreme emphasis on conservative attacks, meaning if you just scatter shots everywhere trying to hit things, you're probably going to get yourself killed from constantly running out of energy. The trick is to only attack when an enemy is making an attack run for your ship, thus making them easier to hit, as indicated by their radar dot turning green, whereas a blue radar dot means they're simply within your turret's field of movement, and a red dot means that they're behind you and thus impossible to hit. This kind of ties in with what real ball turret gunners had to deal with. They didn't exactly have huge amounts of ammo, and even though real-life bullets move very fast, the distances and speeds involved meant you had to lead your targets to hit them, which also meant both a target and your own aircraft had to be moving predictably in order to reliably hit anything, and even then it was still exceedingly difficult. This game tries to replicate that feeling as precisely as it can, but in the process, kind of ignores a couple things which are absent only for the sake of replicating that feeling, and it otherwise makes no sense that such things don't exist here. The first of those being a lead indicator. Well, let's think about this for a second here. Modern radar systems are able to identify targets and provide details on how fast a target is moving based on where it is each time it's pinged, and how far the radar itself has moved in that same span of time. Making a digital lead indicator based on that, well, in real life it's actually pretty challenging, but it was a problem tackled back in the 70s and implemented in various ways on fighter jets from then on. For any kind of spaceship to use manually aimed guns and not have a lead indicator of any kind makes absolutely no sense. Not to mention makes this game way more challenging as a result. So whether the omission was a good idea or not is probably a matter of debate. Though I should point out that some ball turrets actually did have mechanical computers for assisting with lead, so even way back then, not all ball turret gunners were aiming on their wits alone. The second omission, though, is something that even predates digital lead indicators, and is something known as IFF, which stands for Identification Friend or Foe. The purpose of real-life IFF is to automatically determine if a radar-detected target is friendly or unknown. Yet, despite the name, real-life IFF isn't able to figure out if something's hostile or not. All it can do is determine if a target responds to a recognized friendly signal. The point, though, is that IFF was initially developed and put into use before ball turrets were even a thing. Mind you, only by a few years, but the point stands that IFF existed when ball turrets existed. Here in Backlash, there is no such thing as IFF. Friendly targets show up the exact same on your radar and targeting displays as hostile targets. This means if you're not paying attention to what kind of ship you have targeted or what kind of communications are going on, you could easily find yourself shooting down a friendly target and proceeding to fail the mission as a result of that. Now, the game only provides you with a single pair of guns and no other energy-based weapons, but you do get a selection of missiles, including Tiger missiles, Stalker missiles, Cluster missiles, and Spinner missiles, although you only start off with the Tiger missile launcher and have to purchase the others. Tiger missiles are dumbfire, meaning you have to manually aim them the same as your guns, but they do a significant amount of damage and can take out many kinds of ships in a single shot. Stalker missiles can only take out weaker targets in a single shot, but they have homing capabilities. Cluster missiles are basically Tiger missiles with an area of effect, so if multiple hostiles are in formation, you can hit all of them at once. And Spinner missiles are basically Stalkers which do additional damage, making them useful for somewhat stronger targets, though they're still not as powerful as the Tiger or Cluster missiles. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind with the missiles as well. Firstly, you can only carry up to 8 of each kind, but you can have as many different kinds as you want, so the more missile launchers you have, the more missiles you can carry. The other thing to keep in mind, particularly with homing missiles, is that they don't have a range limit. If they miss, they'll start swinging around, making more attempts to hit their target, and they'll keep it up until they ultimately do, sometimes a full 20 or even 30 seconds after you initially launch them. However, their homing capabilities aren't perfect, so they're only liable to hit something if that target is not performing evasive maneuvers. Before we finish things off here, there's a couple very unusual things about this game, or rather, things which were included external to the game. In the setup program, if you press Alt F10, you actually trigger a hidden game to start called Flak Man, which is basically a text mode Pac-Man clone. It's pretty forgettable and doesn't allow you to lead corners, so it doesn't control very well, plus it actually has poor collision detection. But despite that, it's not all that hard, since the enemies don't have any sort of skill at following you around, they just move around at random, really. The other oddity is that this game comes with a program called BLEdit, which is basically a save file editor. Yeah, seriously, the game actually includes its own tool for hacking its own save files and cheating your way to victory. Although I should point out, all it lets you do is adjust which mission you're on and how many credits you have. But really, the way this game works, that's more than enough for going wherever you want to. I'm really not sure why the extra effort was put into these things. Maybe they're just trying to cover for the fact that the game is actually kind of prone to crashing. Yeah, the music is still going despite having dropped back to DOS. And actually the keyboard's not working either, so it's frozen yet still playing music. Beautiful. Overall, Backlash is interesting. I do like that the missions get more dynamic the further into the game you get, such as having to clear minefields, dock with friendly ships. There's even a mission where you have to do a close-range pass to a sun in order to get pursuers off your tail. But let's face it, the entire game is basically a turret section, and if modern games have taught us anything, it's that turret sections are generally not that fun. The problem with the concept of turret sections in games is that it removes one of the dynamics which makes playing most games fun, and that's movement. If you're locked in place and can't move, you've eliminated one of the freedoms the player has and essentially trapped them into whatever sequence of events you're now forcing them to endure. Now, this doesn't make Backlash a bad game, as it was designed to simulate the whole ball turret gunner experience. But it doesn't do it in a believable way, nor does it do it accurately to how it would have been in the first place, even though it's trying to. It makes the game feel like a very weird hybrid between fact and fiction, and I myself didn't enjoy it. But the game is freeware now, and I think there will be a small number of people out there who would get a kick out of it. So I'd say give it a try for yourself if you wish, just don't set your expectations very high. Although the game does run fine with the max cycle setting, it makes crashes even more frequent. So instead, I recommend a fixed cycles count of about 30,000 in order to keep the frame rate from dipping. The game also has joystick support, but I highly recommend sticking with the mouse for this one. Even the game's documentation recommends mouse controls over joystick. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next Saturday is episode 217, and we'll be taking a look at a game which was a very fun, although easy, two-player co-op game on the NES, though the DOS version is nothing like its NES counterpart, and doesn't even have two-player support. If you think you know which game that could be, then be sure to send your guess to adg@pixelships.com, and stay tuned as we delve ever deeper into the recesses of DOS gaming. Thanks for watching, everyone, and special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small sample of you guys.